While I was in my last year of school, my mother got me a Saturday job working with a butcher who had a van and used to come around the estate every Saturday. And I was introduced to him to be a helper, which he took me on, and I enjoyed it. It was a great job. All I was doing really was knocking at the doors of his regular customers, taking the orders, dashing back to the van and having him prepare the joint or whatever it was, and then returning it back to the customer at the doorstep and getting the money for the job. And it was good. I enjoyed it, riding around the estate. And I must have made an impression with him and been satisfactory, because eventually, after a year, and when I was leaving school, he got me a full-time job with the major shop to serve and work in the butcher shop down in Shields. I loved that too. For a start, it was my first main job. I really did. And of course, my duties really were what I would call back shop duties, in such as making sausages, potted meat, mince, and such like. Oh, and black pudding. I always used to like the black pudding because it was a job they had to put the boilers on and boil them, etc. But the black pudding, you know, introduced me to another aspect of butcher life, because we were situated very close to what was the slaughterhouse, where currently the B&Q store used to be. And I had to go to get what I call a bucket of sheep's blood, because that's what black pudding was made from at the time. So I'd get my bucket and walk around to the slaughterhouse. And I had to ask for a man called Tommy Pippet. I do remember his name. And of course, you can imagine, I mean, I'm only just now 14 years of age, and my introduction to the slaughterhouse was rather horrifying. Not expecting to see what I did see, because I'm asking for, where can I find Tommy Pippet? Or just through there, past the stalls, etc., like that. And as I walked through the abattoir, there was scenes of the butchers with their stun guns shooting big steel bolts through the head of the cows to stun them into submission, and they dropped, and then they were picked up by their back legs and strung up onto a small hook and crane sort of situation, where they were then had their throats slit, and I could see this, and the blood draining from them, rushing around the floor, and eventually, after they died completely, they were disemboweled. A horrible, horrible sight for a young boy of my age. In fact, I was nearly fainting at the process, just walking around. But eventually, I found Tommy Pippet, and he was in the section which was slaughtering the sheep, lambs, etc. And I introduced myself just at the time he was busy tying up 3 legs on a sheep, a lamb, and throwing him onto a flat pedestal area. And the sheep, of course, was still alive, but thrashing around and struggling there. And he asked me to put the bucket under the sheep's head. And he got a knife and slit the lamb's throat, and the blood was starting to pump out as its 4th leg, shall I say, it was thrashing like that. And of course, as it was thrashing, it was pumping the blood out of its throat. And he said to me, "Keep the bucket under its throat, lad, and keep stirring." He big wooden spoon, keep stirring, he said, because I don't want it congealing. And you can imagine me, I'm looking at the situation, the poor lamb, the blood in the bucket, and I almost fell head first into the bucket because I just wanted to faint. It was horrifying, horrifying. And of course, in my giddy stage, I gave him the shilling that was entitled for the bucket of blood, and then carried it, walking back to the shop staggering as I was going, almost at the point of fainting, slopping and spilling blood on the way, which of course meant that by the time I got back to the shop, I didn't have a full bucket of blood, and I got a severe rollicking off the butcher for making such a mess of the job. But that was my introduction to butchery and slaughterhouse procedure, and one I shall never forget. Horrifying me, absolutely horrifying. So after 12 months at that job, I managed, fortunately, to get a transfer to a butcher shop at the Nook, which was the co-op shop at the Nook area. And that butcher job was really just what I call counter service, serving customers at the counter. None of this butcher shop all the sausages and stuff like that was pre-made from the factory in Jarrow, and all I had to do was to look pretty, put my lovely butcher's apron on and serve the customers, which was really a delight. It was far, far better than I had at the first shop. So that really was my first introduction to work. Horrifying and really entertaining in a weird sort of way, but there you are. Now, even though I was very, very happy and content at working at the co-op butcher shop, I think it was largely because of my hobby that my dad had introduced me to, with the radio technology, etc., is I had a passion to become an electrical engineer. Not knowing fully what an electrical engineer was, but nevertheless it struck me that it would be a very useful trade to join into. Because my dad had always impressed upon me that because of his own lifestyle and his problems, because he was originally a grocer trainee when he lost his job during the Depression, and he always thought that working in a shop was not a very permanent or good way to work through your lifetime. And he did, in fact, persuade me and encourage me to consider working out of the shop of the butcher shop and finding what he called a more stable job. So my passion, as I say, was to perhaps become an electrical engineer, and I thought it would be a good idea to join the Marine and Technical College, which at that time was placed down in Ocean Road. And I went down to enroll as a part-time student in order to begin my studies. But of course, what I didn't realize at the time was that before you could actually enroll, you had to sign an agreement form to provide and obtain all of the necessary requirements that was essential for the course, such as numerous textbooks, protractors, drawing instruments, you name it. There was so many things which came to a very sizable sum. When I went home and told my mum what my ambition was and what my opportunity was, she put the dampers on us straight away. Well, Bill, we haven't got that kind of money, I'm afraid. You ain't going to get any money for books and things, can't afford it. So pack it in, son, I'm sorry, but that's it. And you know, that took me back to the time of what I call bitter disappointments over money. It cast my mind back to my last year at my school, because even though I wasn't very good academically, I did enjoy my woodwork, as I mentioned, but I also enjoyed the sport activities that they had. And regularly on the sporting field, I was a natural sprinter. Never trained, of course, didn't realize it, but whenever we had the sports days and sport classes during the week, my ability, if I call it, or talent for running and running fast, so impressed the sports master. So much so that he said, Bill, you're a natural. I would like to have you come on to what we call the school team when we go into tournaments with other schools. But you need to have your mum come down to approve of that sort of thing, so I need to talk to her. Which he did. He went down and said, what's it all about? He says, well, look, it would be a shame for him not to be accepted because he is a natural sprinter. Over 100 and 300 yards, I can't say that I was a long distance runner, but just a sprinter. But he said to be on the team, I had to buy the proper tracksuits, or what they call vests and shorts, etc. But most principally at that time was to have what they call the running spiked shoes, which I thought were marvellous. But I didn't have them, and they're very costly. And my mum said, well, I'm sorry, but we ain't got that kind of money, so you can't join. The fellow said, well, it's such a shame. Can't we find a way around that? She says, no, I'm sorry. I'm very pleased for him, but I'm sad that because of we can't afford it, he can't join your team. And that was another example of my bitter disappointment and my mum's decision over money. Always, we've never got enough. We've never got enough. But there you are. It wasn't her choice. But I think she was a bit hard on that. But nevertheless, I didn't become a sprinter either, or an electrical engineer, all because of money. Well, while I was working at the Co-op butcher shop, time was passing on and I was approaching the age of 16. And my dad really went to town on me to say, you've got to get out of that shop, Bill. You've got to get yourself a proper job, learn a trade to be more secure. I said, yeah, but what can I do, Dad? He said, well, get yourself down on Saturday morning to the local employment exchange, which was down at Westow, and just go in and ask them and say, what jobs are on the way? Is there any jobs going for young apprenticeships? And they'll help you. I thought, oh, well, I'll give it a try. So on the Saturday, I went down to the door and spoke to one of the advisors, a man, quite older, and he agreed with my dad. He says, yes, son, I think we'll try and help you, but unfortunately, at the time you've applied, I've only got 2 jobs on the books where an apprenticeship is available. 2 jobs. And I can offer you either one. The first one was working at what he called a brass foundry, smelting, furnaces, molten metal, sweat, heavy lifting. I thought, oh, I'm not keen on that job. Too much like hard work. But I've got another one also where there's a job at a printing factory where they want a boy to learn machine printing. Now, I had no idea what the printing factory would be, but it sounded very interesting to me. I was thinking of typewriters at the time, not understanding clearly what it was. But the decision was easily made because it wasn't that I wanted to be a printer. What I didn't want to be a foundry worker, sweating in a foundry with molten metal. So I opted to be a printer. And he got me the job. I went down, had my interview, and was accepted. I was thrilled to bits. So I became a printer then, and I remained a printer for the rest of my working life, all the way through, and I enjoyed every minute of it. The time was, of course, that in those days, the apprenticeship for printing was a 7-year apprenticeship. But at the end of 7 years, printing was regarded as being one of the top 5 crafts and industries to earn good wages. The top 5. And the journeyman's rate at that time, I always remember, was £3.15 a week. And that was one of the top 5 jobs in the country. Doesn't sound much today, but it was a lot of money in those days. But nevertheless, as I say, I became apprenticed and packed in my butchery job and started to work for the printing company. My introduction to it was fantastic. The machinery, handling type, paper, etc. It seemed to be a fascinating introduction to work, and I loved it from the word go. Loved it so much, as I say, that I devoted my life to it. And there's quite a few stories attached to my printing life, which I'll tell you later. My early printing experience was quite beneficial to me. In fact, it was really fantastically beneficial to me because of the fact that the factory was a non-union shop. And that meant I was able to wander into the other craft departments without any conflict. And I used to, in addition to my machine department work, I was able to wander into the composite department, the typesetting department, and learn a bit of the typesetting techniques and creating of the printing forms. And additionally, I actually used to help out on occasion to the hot metal linotype machine, which was casting what they call slugs of type. So that was a good bonus for me. And further than that, although I didn't wander into the binding room because that was what we call print finishing, there was not a great deal to learn about that. But I did used to go into the paper store and select my own paper for the jobs and cut them to size on the massive guillotine. So I learned, as another machine, I learned to work as well. So all in all, it stood me in good stead for later years, a fact at the time that I wasn't aware of, but it was a great experience for me. And of course, all of this was in the years of 1942, 1944, my early apprenticeship. And I was still in the police cadets, still doing my training and my air raid duties with them during the many air raids that we've talked about. And at the same time, I was still studying very hard in the Air Training Corps on my what I call particular subjects, which hopefully would help me to join the RAF. One of the great features that I was involved in was that the ATC management, or the officer hierarchy, felt that to have a band, a drum and bugle band, would help them in the recruitment process when they did the recruitment parades through the town, etc. And of course, a number of cadets volunteered to join that. But surprisingly, I was the only volunteer that knew how to read music, how to play a bugle, and how to play drums. The only one. So it was left to me, hopefully, to try and teach the other, I think about 10 or 12 volunteers, to create the band. And of course, that wasn't difficult in this sense, but it was very, very challenging, and I enjoyed it greatly because the lads were very enthusiastic. My first task, of course, was to teach them how to blow a bugle, how to play, how to get a tune from it. And then, of course, because they couldn't read music, I had to learn the particular bugle marches and play them in front of them and allow them to, kind of say, play by practice, repeat after me. And I would play a few bars of the particular marching tune and get them to reciprocate and do what I was doing. And of course, it was a question of do what I do situation, but of course, bugle playing is a very repetitive kind of music. So it wasn't really difficult. So again, as I said, I was learning the parts, playing them, and playing them in front of them so they could rehearse and practice and repeat what I was doing. And it took some time, up to about, well, just over 6 months, but they actually got good enough. Good enough. I won't say perfect, but good enough for what we call parade purposes. And at the same time, I was separately taking the drummers. Of course, the first thing that they needed to learn was how to handle the drumsticks, to beat the drum and to do drum rolls, etc. Quite different from drummers today in bands. it meant that they had to do particular staccato beats on the drums. The difficulty was with them was getting them eventually to play the drums in unison and in time with each other. But as I say, just a little over 6 months, they actually managed to, what I call it, become competent, reasonably competent, to go out on a parade. And it went over quite well. But the enthusiasm and the practice meant that they soon became what I call reasonably competent and unashamedly playing in the parades that we went and had around the town. The one big feature that I was very proud to engage in was that I was asked if I would play what they call the solo bugle general salute for the squadron, because the squadron had been awarded a particular new flag, a squadron flag. And of course, as things would happen in those days, it was became a public event. The local vicar came out and did his blessing of the flag routine, and I then was able to stand on the steps of the town hall and play my solo general salute in order to commemorate the actual raising of the flag. And that really was something that I had rehearsed over and over again, and I played it flawlessly, and I was thrilled to bits playing in front of such a crowd. It really went off well, and in fact I was commended by the visiting RAF commander for both playing the bugle for the general salute and also for the creation of the band, and something that I was really very proud of, having done all of that. And of course, it went down very well on my records for the RAF as well.